I'm Melissa Carter, 36 years old, and 3 months ago my parents told me and my 8-year-old son to leave their Christmas dinner and never come back. They didn't whisper it. They didn't say it quietly in the kitchen where no one else could hear. My father stood at the head of the table in front of 16 relatives, pointed toward the door, and said it loud enough that even the neighbors probably heard. "Take your child and get out," he said coldly. "And don't come back." My mother didn't stop him. My sister didn't say a word. My son was still sitting there with a napkin folded neatly on his lap, waiting for grace. And when I realized they meant it, when I realized they were actually throwing us out on Christmas Day like we were nothing, I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply looked at every single person sitting at that table and said one sentence. "Then you won't mind what happens next." 5 minutes later, every one of them was on their feet. 5 minutes later, my father wasn't yelling anymore. 5 minutes later, the same people who had just thrown us out were begging me to undo what I'd done. But before I tell you how that happened, take a second and subscribe to Women Reddit Stories if you enjoy dramatic real-life stories like this. It really helps the channel grow, and you won't miss the next one. Also drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me take you back to the beginning. 18 months before that Christmas dinner. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. 2:12 p.m. I remember the exact time because I had just stepped out of the grocery store in downtown Denver and was loading bags into the trunk of my car when my phone started vibrating in my purse. Unknown number. Normally, I ignore those. But something made me answer. "Hello? Is this Melissa Carter?" "Yes. This is St. Luke's Medical Center. Your husband, Daniel Carter, has been brought into the emergency department following a construction accident. You should come immediately." For a moment I couldn't understand the words. Construction accident? Daniel was a project manager. He worked in an office most days. "What happened?" I asked. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The doctors will explain when you arrive." The line went dead. I don't remember driving to the hospital. I don't remember calling anyone. The next clear memory I have is standing in a white hallway that smelled like disinfectant while a doctor with tired eyes told me that my husband of 11 years had fallen from a scaffold and didn't survive the impact. Just like that. One moment I was planning dinner. The next moment I was a widow. Our son Ethan was 7 years old. I had to pick him up from school that afternoon and explain that his father wasn't coming home ever again. No one prepares you for that conversation. The funeral was 4 days later. It rained the entire morning. My parents came. My older sister Vanessa came with her husband Greg. Aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors, coworkers. Everyone dressed in black. Everyone hugged me and told me how strong I was. But the moment I remember most clearly happened during the reception afterward. I had stepped into the hallway outside the church kitchen because I felt like I couldn't breathe. Through the partially closed door, I heard my sister's voice. "She can't raise Ethan alone," Vanessa whispered. My stomach tightened. She's always been irresponsible with money. Daniel handled everything. I stood frozen. Then my mother's voice answered. "Well, we'll see how she does. Maybe we should consider having Ethan stay with us for a while." My heart dropped into my stomach. I waited. I waited for my mother to defend me. To say something like "Melissa will figure it out." Instead she sighed. "We'll talk about it later," she said quietly. "Let her get through the funeral first." I backed away from the door before they could see me. I told myself they were just worried. Just concerned. Families say strange things when they're grieving. That's what I told myself. At the cemetery, my father pulled me aside just before the service ended. His hand was heavy on my shoulder. "Melissa," he said firmly, "you need to keep yourself together now." I nodded numbly. Ethan is watching you. And people notice when someone falls apart. My throat tightened. I'm trying, Dad. Good, he said. Because weakness doesn't help anyone. That was it. That was the only thing my father said to me the day we buried my husband. I didn't know then that it was only the beginning. 3 months after the funeral, Daniel's life insurance policy was processed. $2.1 million. He had taken the policy out shortly after Ethan was born. Just in case, he'd said back then. I remember laughing at him. We're 25, I told him. Nothing is going to happen. But something did happen. And suddenly I was sitting in a lawyer's office signing documents that turned my husband's death into a number on a bank statement. The moment the money appeared in my account, something changed. At first it was subtle. Vanessa started calling more often. Just checking in, she'd say sweetly. How are you holding up? My mother began inviting us to Sunday dinners every week. Family should stay close during hard times, she told me. Even my father, who rarely called anyone, started asking about my finances. How are you managing things? He'd ask casually. Then one Sunday evening, 4 months after the insurance payout, everything shifted. We were sitting around my parents' dining table. My father cleared his throat. Melissa, he said, I've been thinking. I looked up. You should probably let Vanessa help manage your money. I blinked. Excuse me? Your sister has experience, he continued. Real estate, investments. You've never handled this kind of money before. Vanessa smiled across the table. We just want to make sure you're protected. I set down my fork. I already have a financial advisor, I said calmly. Daniel arranged everything years ago. The room went quiet. Vanessa's smile tightened. Well, she said lightly, sometimes professionals don't understand family needs. I think they do, I replied. After dinner, as I was helping Ethan put on his jacket, a frail hand touched my wrist. It was my grandmother. 86 years old. Sharp eyes. Still stronger than most people half her age. She leaned closer so no one else could hear. Be careful with that money, she whispered. I frowned. Grandma? She slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand. There's someone you should talk to, she said softly. Then she walked away before I could ask anything else. I didn't open the paper until Ethan and I got home. Inside was a phone number. And 3 words written in shaky handwriting. Call Daniel Brooks. I stared at it for a long time. Then I set it on the kitchen counter and told myself Grandma was probably overthinking things. I had no idea how wrong I was. And I definitely didn't know that 18 months later, my own parents would tell me and my 8-year-old son to leave their house forever. Or that 5 minutes after they said those words, everything would fall apart. I didn't call the number right away. For almost 2 weeks, the piece of paper sat on my kitchen counter next to the coffee maker. Every morning I'd see it while pouring cereal for Ethan. Every night I'd see it while washing dishes. Call Daniel Brooks. 3 simple words. 3 words my grandmother had been serious enough about to slip into my hand like it was some kind of secret. But life was busy. Ethan still needed help with homework. Bills still needed to be paid. And grief doesn't disappear just because time passes. Sometimes it actually gets heavier. 6 months went by. Vanessa's calls started becoming more frequent. More pointed. Dad's store hasn't been doing great lately, she mentioned one afternoon while we were on the phone. My father owned a small hardware store outside Denver. He'd run it for nearly 30 years. That's too bad, I said carefully. Yeah, she sighed dramatically. Small businesses are struggling everywhere. Then a pause. You know, it must be weird sitting on that kind of money. I didn't answer. You could help the family if you wanted, she added. The words hung in the air. I changed the subject. But after that conversation, the tone shifted. My mother started mentioning medical bills. My father started complaining about suppliers raising prices. Vanessa kept bringing up investments and family strategy. Little hints. Little nudges. Nothing direct. At least not yet. Then one evening my phone rang while Ethan and I were eating dinner. It was my mother. And she was crying. Actually crying. "Melissa," she sobbed. "Your father might lose the store." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "What do you mean?" "Sales are terrible," she said. "The bank is threatening to cut his credit line. We could lose everything." My chest tightened. Despite everything, they were still my parents. "How much do you need?" I asked quietly. There was a pause. Then my father's voice came on the line. "Put it on speaker," he told my mother. Suddenly his voice filled the room. "I don't need charity from my daughter." I frowned. I wasn't offering charity. I said I could help. "We don't need a handout," he snapped. Before I could respond, Vanessa's voice slid into the conversation. "What Dad means," she said smoothly, "is that there's a smarter solution." "What solution?" "If you let me manage your finances," she said, "we could combine resources. Help Dad properly." I leaned back in my chair. "Manage my finances?" "Simple paperwork," she said. "Power of attorney. Asset oversight. Nothing complicated. Power of attorney." Daniel's voice echoed in my memory. "Never sign anything you haven't read twice. And never give financial control to the family." I swallowed slowly. "I'll think about it," I said. Vanessa's sweetness cracked for just a second. "What's there to think about?" she asked. "We're family." I said I'll think about it. I ended the call. That night, after Ethan went to bed, I stood in the kitchen staring at the paper Grandma had given me months earlier. The phone number. "Call Daniel Brooks." Maybe it was finally time. I picked up my phone and dialed. The line rang twice. Then a calm male voice answered. "Daniel Brooks speaking." "Hi, my name is Melissa Carter. My grandmother, Eleanor Whitaker, told me to call you." There was a pause. Then his tone changed instantly. "Melissa?" "Yes. Your husband Daniel Carter was my law school roommate." My breath caught. "What?" "We stayed close over the years," he continued. "When he updated his will after Ethan was born, he asked me to keep an eye on things if anything ever happened." I sank slowly into a kitchen chair. "I didn't know that." "He didn't want to worry you," Daniel Brooks said gently. Silence filled the line for a moment. Then he asked, "What's going on?" So I told him. Everything. The phone calls. The pressure. The power of attorney idea. When I finished, he was quiet for several seconds. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "Melissa, your grandmother contacted me 3 weeks ago." "She did?" "Yes. She said she was concerned about your sister." My heart began beating faster. "Concerned how?" "I started looking into a few things," he said carefully. Paper shuffled on his desk. "Your father's hardware store isn't just struggling." My grip tightened on the phone. "It's drowning." "How bad?" 3 months from bankruptcy." My throat went dry. "And your sister?" I asked. Another pause. "Vanessa's real estate company took a massive loss last year." I closed my eyes. "How massive?" "Several investors are threatening lawsuits." The room felt suddenly colder. Daniel Brooks continued. "Melissa, they don't want to manage your money." My voice barely worked. "What do they want?" "They want control of it." A long silence stretched between us. Then he added quietly, "And once they have power of attorney, They could legally move almost everything. My heart pounded. What should I do? For starters, he said firmly, don't sign anything. That part one figured out. Second, he continued, your grandmother is planning something. What do you mean? She asked me to witness an update to her will. My eyebrows furrowed. Why? I believe, he said slowly, she's aware of the same situation I am. I stared at the dark kitchen window. What situation? That your family is preparing to corner you. Corner me where? Daniel Brooks exhaled slowly. Somewhere public. Where you'll feel pressured. Somewhere emotional. A memory flashed in my mind. Vanessa was standing in my living room 3 days earlier holding a manila folder. You'll bring the signed papers to Christmas dinner, she had said coldly. The realization hit me like ice water. Christmas dinner. At my parents' house. With the entire extended family. Maximum witnesses. Maximum pressure. I whispered into the phone. They're planning to make me sign in front of everyone. Daniel Brooks' voice was calm. Yes. I swallowed. What do I do? You attend dinner, he said. My stomach dropped. What? But you don't go alone. My heart began to race. Are you saying? I'll be nearby, he said. Just in case. 3 days before Christmas, my father called. Dinner starts at 6, he said bluntly. I stayed quiet. You'll be there, he continued. Not a question. A demand. And you'll bring those signed papers Vanessa prepared. I took a deep breath. Dad, I'm not signing anything. His voice hardened. This isn't a discussion. It's my money. It's family money, he snapped. I felt something cold settle in my chest. No, I said quietly. It isn't. There was a long silence. Then he said something that would echo in my mind for weeks. If you refuse to help this family, Melissa, then don't bother coming to Christmas. The line went dead. I stared at my phone. A moment later Ethan appeared in the hallway in his pajamas. Mom? I forced a smile. Yeah, buddy? Are we still going to Grandma and Grandpa's for Christmas? I looked at him. Then I looked at the phone number still saved in my contacts. Daniel Brooks. I knew it was a trap. I just didn't know how ugly it was going to get. But I also knew something else. If they wanted a performance, they were going to get one. Christmas Eve was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel louder than it should be. Ethan was asleep in his room, one arm wrapped around the stuffed dinosaur Daniel had bought him 2 birthdays ago. The apartment was dim except for the small Christmas tree in the corner, its lights blinking softly against the walls. I sat on the couch with a blanket around my shoulders, staring at my phone. Daniel Brooks had texted earlier that afternoon. I'll be ready tomorrow if you need me. That was it. No drama. No questions. Just calm reassurance. I appreciated that more than he probably realized. Because the truth was, I was nervous. Not about the papers. Not about Vanessa. But about what would happen if everything Daniel Brooks suspected was actually true. Families can survive a lot of things. But once trust shatters, it rarely goes back together the same way. Around midnight I stood up and walked to the kitchen for a glass of water. The folded paper from my grandmother was still taped to the inside of a cabinet door. I'd moved it there months ago so Ethan wouldn't ask about it. 3 words. Call Daniel Brooks. Grandma had known something was coming. Maybe she'd known for longer than any of us. I was still staring at it when my phone buzzed again. A text from Grandma. Are you coming tomorrow? I smiled slightly. Grandma Eleanor was 86, but she used texting like a detective gathering evidence. Yes, I wrote back. Good, she replied almost immediately. Then another message appeared. Remember what I told you? I frowned. Which part? Her reply came slowly. You are stronger than they think. Then another message. And sometimes people only show their true selves when they believe they've already won. I stared at that message for a long time. Finally I typed. I'll see you tomorrow, Grandma. Christmas morning arrived cold and bright. Fresh snow covered the sidewalks outside our apartment building. Ethan woke me up at 7 by jumping onto the bed. Mom. It's Christmas. His excitement was contagious. For the next 2 hours we opened presents, drank hot chocolate, and watched cartoons while the tree lights blinked in the background. For a little while, everything felt normal. Then around 10 o'clock my phone rang. Daniel Brooks. I stepped onto the balcony so Ethan wouldn't hear the conversation. Merry Christmas, he said. You too. Still going to dinner tonight? Yes. Good, he replied. Because something new came up. My stomach tightened. What kind of something? I received an email early this morning, he said. From who? Your grandmother. I leaned against the balcony railing. What did it say? It included a screenshot, he explained. A screenshot of what? An email conversation between Vanessa and your mother. Cold air filled my lungs. What were they saying? Daniel Brooks hesitated. Melissa, are you sitting down? Yes. He exhaled slowly. The subject line of the email chain was Operation Melissa. My fingers tightened around the phone. That can't be real. I wish it wasn't. Silence hung between us. Read it to me, I said. Paper rustled on his end of the line. First message, he began. From Vanessa to Patricia. Dated April 22nd. 2 weeks after your husband's funeral. My stomach twisted. Daniel Brooks continued reading. We need to move quickly before Melissa gets smart. She's emotional right now. Dad's financial problems give us the perfect angle. I closed my eyes. Keep going. If we play the supportive family long enough, she'll feel guilty for having money while we struggle. My heart started pounding. Once she signs the POA, we control everything. The words felt like a punch. She won't even understand what happened until it's too late. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Melissa? Daniel Brooks said softly. I'm here. There are dozens of emails, he continued. Months of planning. My voice sounded distant even to me. They planned this right after Daniel died. Yes. And Christmas dinner? Was mentioned several times. I swallowed hard. What exactly did they say about Christmas? Paper shifted again. Daniel Brooks read slowly. Holiday gathering gives us witnesses. She won't say no in front of everyone. I stared out over the snow-covered parking lot. Wow, I whispered. Melissa, he said carefully, I can come tonight. I shook my head instinctively before realizing he couldn't see me. No. You're sure? Yes. Why? Because if they want a performance, I said quietly, I'm going to give them one. There was a pause. Then Daniel Brooks asked one more question. Do you trust your grandmother? With my life. Good, he replied. Then bring your phone tonight. Why? Because if things go the way I think they will. He paused. You may only get one chance to turn the table. By late afternoon, the sky had turned pale gray. Ethan helped me wrap the small gifts we were bringing for the cousins. At 5 o'clock we got into the car. The drive to my parents' house took about 30 minutes. The closer we got, the quieter Ethan became. Finally he asked softly, Mom? Yeah? Are Grandpa and Aunt Vanessa mad at you? I kept my eyes on the road. They're upset about something. Did you do something wrong? The question stabbed deeper than he knew. No, buddy, I said gently. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about things. He nodded slowly. When we turned onto my parents' street, I counted the cars parked along the curb. A lot of them. More than usual. Uncles. Aunts. Cousins. Neighbors. Vanessa had made sure the audience would be big. I parked the car and turned to Ethan. You okay? He nodded. Yeah. Stick close to me tonight, okay? Okay. We walked up the snow-covered path toward the house. Through the windows I could see lights glowing and people moving inside. Laughter drifted out through the front door. Everything looked normal. Perfect. Like the kind of Christmas scene you'd see on a greeting card. But I knew better. Inside the house was a trap. And everyone inside believed I was about to walk right into it. They had no idea that 5 minutes after they told me to leave, everything they planned would fall apart. The front door opened before we even knocked. Vanessa stood there smiling. Perfect makeup. Perfect hair. Red dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Merry Christmas, she said brightly, like nothing in the world was wrong. Her eyes moved quickly from me to Ethan, then back again. Assessing. Calculating. Exactly the way Daniel Brooks had described. I forced a polite smile. Merry Christmas. She bent down toward Ethan. Hi, sweetheart. Wow, you've gotten so tall. Ethan smiled politely, but he stayed close to my side. Everyone's in the dining room, Vanessa continued. Dinner's about to start. She stepped aside and gestured for us to come in. The house smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon candles. For a second, the familiar warmth of it hit me like a memory from another life. This house had been my childhood home. I learned to ride a bike on the driveway. I scraped my knees on the sidewalk out front. I used to think this place was the safest place in the world. Funny how things change. The living room was packed. Relatives stood in small groups talking and laughing. Some of them looked genuinely happy to see us. Others avoided eye contact. A few gave me sympathetic smiles that made my stomach tighten. They had already heard something. Vanessa must have prepared them. Melissa. Grandma Eleanor's voice came from the couch near the fireplace. Ethan ran to her instantly. Grandma. She wrapped him in a hug so tight he laughed. There's my favorite boy. I bent down and kissed her cheek. Merry Christmas, Grandma. Her sharp blue eyes studied my face. You look tired. I'm okay. Her gaze flicked briefly toward the dining room where my parents were setting plates. Then she squeezed my hand once. Hard. That was all she needed to say. Dinner was ready 10 minutes later. The table stretched nearly the entire length of the dining room. My father sat at the head like always. My mother beside him. Vanessa and her husband Greg across from them. The rest of the family filled the remaining seats. 16 people total. Exactly the kind of audience Vanessa wanted. Ethan sat beside me quietly. I could feel the tension in the room like static electricity. At first, dinner went normally. Turkey was carved. Potatoes passed around. Wine poured. Small talk floated across the table. But beneath the polite conversation, something darker was building. I could see it in the sideways glances. The whispers. The way Vanessa kept looking at the clock. Halfway through dinner she finally stood up. She tapped her wine glass lightly with a fork. The soft clink cut through the room. Conversation stopped. Everyone turned toward her. Vanessa smiled warmly. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said sweetly. But there's something important we should talk about as a family. My chest tightened. Here it was. She placed both hands on the back of her chair. As most of you know, she continued, this year has been very difficult for Melissa. A few relatives nodded sympathetically. Losing Daniel was tragic, she said. Her voice softened dramatically. We all care about Melissa and Ethan very much. More nods. More quiet murmurs. Then her tone shifted slightly. But recently, we've become concerned. I felt Ethan glance up at me. Vanessa continued. Melissa received a large insurance settlement after Daniel's accident. Now everyone was looking directly at me. Every single face. She paused for effect. And unfortunately, we've noticed some troubling decisions. My fingers tightened under the table. Vanessa, I said quietly. But she kept talking. We've tried to help her privately, she said. But she refuses to listen. My father cleared his throat loudly. My mother looked down at her plate. Vanessa reached under her chair and pulled out a manila folder. The same one she had brought to my apartment a week earlier. This document, she said, holding it up, would allow me to co-manage Melissa's finances. Murmurs rippled across the table. For Ethan's future, she added quickly. She looked directly at me. Melissa, we all love you. We just want to make sure the money Daniel left is handled responsibly. The room went completely silent. 16 pairs of eyes waited. Vanessa smiled expectantly. Well, she asked gently. Will you sign? I slowly put down my fork. No. The word echoed louder than I expected. Vanessa blinked. I'm sorry? I said no. A fork clattered against someone's plate. My father's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood. You don't get to say no, he snapped. The anger in his voice made Ethan flinch. Yes, I replied calmly. I do. You're being selfish, my mother said coldly. The word hit harder than I expected. I offered to help, I said. I offered Dad $50,000. Gasps spread around the table. My father slammed his hand down. 50,000, he barked. You have over $2 million sitting in the bank. And you offered scraps. That wasn't scraps, I said quietly. That was help. Vanessa stepped closer to the table. See, she said to the others. This is what we've been dealing with. She doesn't understand money. She doesn't understand responsibility. Someone down the table muttered something about gambling. My head snapped up. What? Vanessa's expression remained innocent. There have been rumors. My heart sank. She'd done it. She'd told them. The story about me gambling away Daniel's insurance money. That's why everyone had been looking at me that way. Mommy? Ethan's voice was small beside me. Tears had begun forming in his eyes. That was the moment something inside me shifted. All the anger. All the betrayal. All the humiliation. It suddenly felt very simple. I stood up slowly. My father pointed toward the door. If you're not going to cooperate, he said coldly, then you and your child can leave. The words hung in the air. Vanessa crossed her arms. That's probably best, she added. My mother finally looked at me. Her voice was calm. Christmas would be so much better without you here. Ethan started crying. For a moment the room went completely silent. 16 people watched. Waiting. Expecting me to break. To apologize. To sign the papers just to make the embarrassment stop. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. Okay, I said calmly. If you want us to leave. I looked around the table. Then you won't mind if I make one quick call? My father scoffed. Calling the police? No. I started dialing. Just someone who's been waiting to hear how this dinner goes. Vanessa's smile faltered. Who are you calling? The phone rang once. Twice. Then a voice answered. Daniel Brooks speaking. I put the call on speaker. Daniel, I said. It's Melissa. I think it's time. There was a pause. Then he replied calmly, "I'll be there in 5 minutes." The room exploded. "What is this?" my father demanded. Vanessa's face had gone pale. "Who did you just call?" she snapped. I smiled for the first time that night. "You'll see." And suddenly, the 5 longest minutes of their lives began. The room erupted instantly. "What is this nonsense?" my father demanded, his voice rising. Vanessa stepped forward so quickly her chair nearly tipped over. "Who did you just call?" she snapped. Her perfect composure was starting to crack. I leaned calmly against the back of my chair. "Someone who knows exactly what's been going on." "That's ridiculous," she scoffed. "You don't even have friends." A few people at the table shifted uncomfortably. Ethan was still crying softly beside me. Grandma Eleanor tightened her arm around his shoulders. "It's okay, sweetheart," she murmured. Then she looked up at the rest of the table. And her expression changed. For the first time all night, my grandmother looked angry. Not annoyed. Not disappointed. Angry. "Everyone sit down," she said quietly. My father glared at her. "Mother, this isn't your concern." Grandma slowly stood up from her chair. The room went silent. I said, "Sit down." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the room like a command. And something about the way she said it made even my father hesitate. "This is my house," she continued calmly. "My table. My Christmas dinner." She placed a protective hand on Ethan's shoulder. "And no one is leaving until I say they can." The authority in her voice was unmistakable. My father sat back down slowly, clearly furious. Vanessa folded her arms. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "We're waiting for some stranger to show up?" "Yes," I said simply. 5 minutes had never felt so long. No one spoke. No one moved. You could practically hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Tick. 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 Then the doorbell rang. Every head in the room turned toward the front hall. Grandma smiled slightly. "That must be him," she said. My father slammed his napkin on the table. "Fine," he growled. "Let's see what kind of circus you've brought into this house." Vanessa walked quickly to the front door. A moment later footsteps echoed down the hallway. Then she returned to the dining room. But she wasn't smiling anymore. A man followed behind her. Mid-40s. Tall. Calm. Dark suit despite the snow outside. He carried a leather briefcase. His expression was composed as he stepped into the room and looked around the crowded table. "Good evening," he said politely. "My name is Daniel Brooks." My father crossed his arms. "And?" Daniel Brooks set the briefcase gently on the dining table. "I'm an attorney." His voice was steady. "And I represent Melissa Carter." The tension in the room thickened instantly. Vanessa scoffed. "An attorney? Seriously?" Daniel Brooks opened the briefcase and removed a thick folder. "Mrs. Eleanor Whitaker also asked me to attend tonight," he continued calmly. Grandma nodded from the far end of the table. "That's correct." My mother suddenly looked uneasy. "Mom, what is this?" Grandma didn't answer. Instead, she looked at Daniel Brooks. "Go ahead." Daniel Brooks opened the folder. "What I have here," he said, "is a documented email chain between Vanessa Carter and Patricia Carter." My mother's face drained of color. "What?" Vanessa laughed nervously. "Emails? Anyone can fake emails." Daniel Brooks remained calm. "These messages were verified this morning by a digital forensics analyst." He slid several printed pages onto the table. "They span nearly 18 months. My father leaned forward. "What emails?" Daniel Brooks flipped to the first page. The subject line, he read slowly, is Operation Melissa. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Gasps spread down the table. That's ridiculous, Vanessa snapped. Daniel Brooks ignored her. He began reading. April 22nd. 2 weeks after Daniel Carter's funeral. He glanced up briefly. This message is from Vanessa Carter to Patricia Carter. My mother grabbed the edge of the table. Her knuckles turned white. Daniel Brooks continued. Melissa is completely vulnerable right now. If we play the supportive family long enough, she'll start trusting us again. Silence fell. Dad's financial problems give us the perfect excuse. Aunt Linda's jaw dropped. What? Daniel Brooks read the next line. Once she signs the power of attorney papers, we control everything. Several relatives began murmuring. That's not what that meant, Vanessa snapped quickly. Daniel Brooks calmly turned the page. May 3rd, he said. We need to start planting the gambling story. My heart pounded. If the family thinks Melissa is unstable with money, no one will question us taking control. The room exploded with whispers. You told us she was gambling, Uncle David said slowly, staring at Vanessa. Vanessa's voice shook. I was trying to protect her. Grandma's voice cut through the noise. No. The single word silenced the entire room. You were trying to steal from her. My mother suddenly stood up. This is being taken completely out of context. Daniel Brooks slid another document onto the table. Here is the authentication report, he said. IP addresses traced to Vanessa Carter's laptop and Patricia Carter's phone. No one spoke. Vanessa's face had turned pale. Melissa, she said desperately. This isn't how it looks. I met her eyes calmly. Really? My father slammed his hand on the table. This doesn't prove anything. Daniel Brooks reached back into the briefcase. That's true, he said. These emails only prove intent. He removed another document. A thick one. Bound with official legal paper. But this proves something else. The room grew still again. My mother's voice trembled. What is that? Daniel Brooks held the document up. This, he said, is the updated will of Eleanor Whitaker. Every eye turned toward Grandma. Vanessa's voice cracked. Grandma, you already have a will. Grandma smiled slightly. Yes. But I changed it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Daniel Brooks opened the document. This will was executed 3 weeks ago, he explained. It was witnessed by myself and 2 independent parties. My father's voice was barely controlled. Just read it. Daniel Brooks nodded. He began. I, Eleanor Margaret Whitaker, being of sound mind. He paused briefly. Hereby leave my primary residence at 1847, Willow Creek Road, including all property and assets attached to it. The house alone was worth nearly $2 million. Everyone in the room knew it. Daniel Brooks finished the sentence. To my granddaughter, Melissa Carter. For a moment no one moved. Then Vanessa screamed. What? Her chair crashed backward as she jumped to her feet. That house was supposed to be mine. Grandma's voice was cold. You assumed that. Vanessa looked like she might collapse. We talked about renovating it. Yes, Grandma said calmly. You talked about selling it. My father slumped into his chair. My mother started crying. And suddenly, the same people who had just thrown me and my son out of Christmas dinner were staring at me like the ground had disappeared beneath their feet. Because in less than 5 minutes, everything they had planned had just collapsed. For a few seconds, the dining room was completely silent. Not the polite silence from earlier. This was different. This was the kind of silence that happens when people realize they've just watched something collapse that they thought was guaranteed. Vanessa was still standing beside her overturned chair. Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. That's not possible, she said finally. Her voice sounded thin now. Desperate. That house was supposed to come to me. Grandma Eleanor didn't raise her voice. You decided that on your own. But you promised. I promised nothing. Grandma folded her hands calmly on the table. You assumed I would reward greed. Vanessa's face twisted. You're choosing her over your own daughter and granddaughter? Grandma's eyes hardened. I'm choosing the only person at this table who hasn't spent the last 18 months trying to steal from family. A murmur rippled across the room. My father sat frozen. My mother was crying quietly beside him, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Daniel Brooks calmly closed the will document and placed it back in his briefcase. Legally speaking, he said, Mrs. Carter will inherit the property upon Mrs. Whitaker's passing. No one spoke. Then something happened I never expected. My mother suddenly pushed back from the table and dropped to her knees. Right there on Grandma's antique rug. Melissa, she sobbed. The sound shocked everyone. She crawled halfway around the table toward me. Melissa, please. I stared down at her, stunned. My mother had never begged for anything in her life. I didn't mean it, she cried. None of it. Her voice broke. We were scared. Your father's business was failing. Vanessa kept saying we needed to act quickly. Vanessa spun toward her. Mom, stop. But it was too late. My mother looked up at me with red swollen eyes. I shouldn't have said those things to Ethan, she whispered. The memory flashed through my mind instantly. Her voice earlier that evening. Christmas would be so much better without you here. Ethan tightened his grip on my hand. Vanessa tried a different tactic. She hurried around the table and grabbed my arm. Melissa, she said urgently. Her voice had changed completely. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the smugness. Now she sounded scared. I'm sorry. Real tears were running down her face now. I was desperate. She glanced nervously at the rest of the family. You don't understand how bad things got. Her voice lowered. Greg doesn't know about the debts. Her husband Greg looked up sharply. What debts? Vanessa ignored him. If this gets out, my entire business is finished. She squeezed my arm. Please, Melissa. I'll fix everything. I slowly pulled my arm away. Across the table I saw Uncle David shaking his head in disbelief. I can't believe you two lied about her gambling, he muttered. Aunt Linda looked sick. You told us she was burning through the insurance money. Vanessa looked around desperately. I was trying to protect the family. Grandma laughed. A cold, humorless sound. No. You were trying to isolate her. Grandma stood slowly. At 86, she still carried herself like a judge delivering a verdict. You wanted everyone to believe Melissa was irresponsible so no one would question you taking control of her money. Vanessa's shoulders sagged. The room felt smaller now. Tighter. Like everyone was trapped inside the truth together. My father finally spoke. His voice sounded hollow. Melissa. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. You have to understand. I waited. 30 years I ran that store, he continued quietly. I built it from nothing. His hands trembled slightly. When the bank started threatening foreclosure. He stopped. For the first time in my life, my father looked old. You chose greed, I said softly. His head dropped. Across the room whispers continued spreading. Cousins exchanging stunned looks. Aunts covering their mouths. Everyone realizing they had believed a lie. I felt Ethan shift beside me. I looked down. He was staring at my mother still kneeling on the floor. Mom, he whispered. Yes, buddy? Why is Grandma crying? I swallowed. That's a long story. He thought about that for a moment. Then he said something so simple it made half the room look away in shame. Did we do something wrong? I knelt beside him. No. Are we in trouble? No. I hugged him tightly. We just told the truth. When I stood back up, my mother was still kneeling. Melissa, she said weakly. Please forgive us. Vanessa nodded frantically. Yes. Please. The entire room watched. Waiting. Expecting me to say something. I took a slow breath. Then I spoke calmly. Stand up. They both froze. Please, I repeated. Get off the floor. My mother slowly pushed herself up. Vanessa followed. Hope flickered across their faces. You forgive us? Vanessa asked. I shook my head gently. No. The word landed like a stone. I'm not interested in revenge, I continued. I'm not going to sue anyone. Relief flashed across several faces. But, I added quietly, I am done pretending this didn't happen. I looked directly at Vanessa. You told me I didn't have friends. Her eyes dropped. You said I had no personality. Silence spread across the table. My 8-year-old son heard you say those things. Vanessa flinched. I turned toward my parents. You told him Christmas would be better without his mother. My mother covered her face. I'll never forget that. The room stayed silent. Then I said the only thing left that mattered. From now on there will be boundaries. My father nodded slowly. Like he already understood. I reached for Ethan's hand. Come on, buddy. We started walking toward the door. Grandma Eleanor grabbed her coat and followed. Where are you going? My father asked hoarsely. I paused. Then I looked back at the room one last time. At this point, I said quietly, I think you all understand exactly what happens 5 minutes after someone tells us to leave. The house was completely silent as we walked toward the front door. No one tried to stop us. No one raised their voice. The same people who had been shouting just minutes earlier were now sitting frozen around the table, staring at the floor or avoiding my eyes entirely. It was strange how quickly power could shift. 5 minutes earlier they had believed I was cornered. 5 minutes earlier they had believed I would crumble. Now the room looked like a courtroom after the verdict had already been delivered. Ethan squeezed my hand tightly as we stepped into the hallway. Behind us I could hear my mother crying quietly. My father still hadn't said another word. Vanessa's chair was still tipped over where she had jumped up earlier. I reached for the front door handle. Then my grandmother's voice stopped me. Melissa. I turned. Grandma Eleanor stood in the doorway of the dining room. Her small frame somehow filled the entire space. She looked at the table. At her daughter. At Vanessa. At the rest of the silent relatives. I want everyone here to understand something, she said. No one interrupted. Tonight was not Melissa destroying this family. Her voice was calm but firm. This family started destroying itself the moment greed became more important than love. Several people lowered their heads. Grandma continued. Melissa offered help months ago. She nodded toward my father. You refused it. Then she looked at my mother. You lied to your own grandson. Finally her eyes landed on Vanessa. And you spent 18 months plotting to steal from your own sister. Vanessa didn't respond. She couldn't. Grandma turned back toward me. Go home, sweetheart. Her voice softened. I'll call you tomorrow. I nodded. Ethan and I stepped outside into the cold night air. Snow had started falling again. Soft flakes drifting down through the porch light. For a moment we just stood there breathing in the quiet. The chaos inside the house felt like a different world already. Ethan tugged my sleeve. Mom? Yeah? Are we in trouble? I knelt down so we were eye level. No. Did Grandpa mean it when he said we shouldn't come back? I thought carefully before answering. I think Grandpa said something he can't take back. Ethan nodded slowly. Then he asked the question I knew would eventually come. Are they still our family? That one took longer. Finally I said gently. Family isn't just about who you're related to. He tilted his head. What else is it? It's about who treats you with love. He thought about that. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. Grandma Eleanor treats us with love. Yes, I said softly. She does. We drove home quietly. Ethan fell asleep halfway through the ride, his head leaning against the car window. When we reached the apartment, I carried him inside and tucked him into bed. For the first time all day, the tension in my chest finally began to loosen. My phone started ringing about 10 minutes later. The first call was from my cousin Amanda. Melissa, she said immediately. I'm so sorry. For what? For believing Vanessa. Her voice was full of regret. She told all of us you were gambling the insurance money. I closed my eyes. You should have asked me. I know. There was a pause. I should have. The second call came from Uncle David. I feel sick, he admitted. Your aunt and I talked the entire drive home. You didn't deserve any of that. Then Aunt Linda called. Then 2 more cousins. Then another aunt. By midnight I had received 13 phone calls and more than 40 text messages. Every one of them apologizing. Every one of them saying the same thing. We didn't know. But the 3 people I expected to hear from the most never called. Not that night. Not the next morning either. The following afternoon Daniel Brooks phoned me. The fallout has begun, he said. What do you mean? Your father filed bankruptcy paperwork this morning. My chest tightened slightly. And Vanessa? She lost 2 major investors already. Apparently word about last night's dinner traveled faster than anyone expected. In business circles, reputation is everything, Daniel Brooks said. And right now hers is collapsing. I leaned back against the couch. I didn't want to ruin anyone's life. You didn't, he replied calmly. You just stopped letting them ruin yours. Later that evening Grandma called. Her voice sounded lighter than it had in years. I have a question, she said. What kind of question? Would you and Ethan consider letting an old woman move in for a while? I blinked. What? She chuckled softly. I've been living in that big house alone for 10 years. Her tone softened. But Ethan hugs me like I matter. And you've never once asked me for anything. I looked around our small apartment. 2 bedrooms. Tiny kitchen. Second-hand furniture. But suddenly the idea didn't feel strange at all. Ethan would love that, I said. A moment later Ethan shouted from the hallway. Love what? I laughed. How would you feel if Grandma Eleanor came to live with us? His eyes lit up. Really? Really. He ran to the phone. Grandma. You can have my room. Grandma laughed so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. A month later, her antique rocking chair sat in the corner of our living room. Her knitting basket lived beside the couch. And every night the 3 of us ate dinner together at our small kitchen table. It wasn't the big Christmas house. It wasn't the fancy dining room. But it felt like something better. It felt like peace. 3 months after that Christmas dinner, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Hello? Melissa, it's Mom. Her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. I won't keep you long, she said. I just wanted to say. I'm sorry. I walked onto the balcony so Ethan wouldn't hear. The things I said to you, and to Ethan. I can't take them back. No, I said quietly. You can't. She cried softly. I know. There was a long pause. Finally, she whispered. I hope one day you can forgive me. I looked out over the city lights. I need time, I said honestly. And if I ever reach out, it will be because I'm ready. She understood. I could hear it in the silence. Before hanging up, she said one last thing. You were stronger than we thought. After the call ended, I opened a notebook I'd started keeping beside the couch. I wrote one sentence that night. Family is not the people who try to control you. Family is the people who stand beside you when you finally say no. Ethan ran into the living room a few minutes later. Mom. Grandma burned the cookies again. Grandma shouted from the kitchen. They are not burned. I closed the notebook and smiled. Because sometimes the most peaceful endings come after the loudest moments. And that Christmas dinner taught me something I will never forget. The moment you stop letting people walk over you is the moment they realize they never had power over you at all. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe to Women Reddit Stories so you don't miss the next one. And tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to draw boundaries with toxic family members? I'd love to hear your story.